Long before the time of written history, in the mist-shrouded hills of what would one day be Ireland, the people of the land were ruled by the cycles of nature. These were the Celts, a proud and powerful people, who believed that the world was full of spirits, some benevolent, others malevolent. They honored these spirits with festivals that marked the turning of the seasons, the most important of which was Samhain. Samhain, which fell on the last day of October, was the Celtic New Year, a time when the veil between the world of the living and the world of the dead was at its thinnest. On this night, the spirits of those who had passed on could return to the earth, walking among the living once more. The Celts feared these spirits, but they also respected them, knowing that the dead held great power over the living. As the day of Samhain approached, the villages would prepare. They would gather their harvest, slaughter their livestock, and stockpile food for the long, harsh winter ahead. On the night itself, they would extinguish their hearth fires, plunging their homes into darkness. Then, they would gather on the hilltops, where a great bonfire would be lit, a beacon to ward off the evil spirits and guide the souls of the departed back to their resting place. The Celts would don costumes made of animal skins and heads, disguising themselves as spirits to confuse the real ones that walked the earth. They believed that by blending in with the spirits, they would avoid harm. Offerings of food and drink were left on doorsteps to appease the spirits, ensuring that they would not bring misfortune upon the household. But not all spirits were content with mere offerings. There were those who were restless, vengeful, and hungry for more than just food. These spirits would roam the countryside, seeking out the living to take back with them to the world of the dead. In the village of Tir na Nog, nestled deep in the heart of the Celtic lands, the people were preparing for Samhain. The harvest had been gathered, the animals slaughtered, and the bonfire was ready to be lit. But there was an unease in the air, a feeling that something was different about this year's Samhain. On the eve of the festival, a stranger arrived in the village. He was a tall man, clad in a long, dark cloak that seemed to blend with the shadows. His face was hidden beneath a hood, and his voice was low and soft when he spoke. "I seek shelter for the night," the stranger said, his gaze sweeping over the villagers who had gathered in the square. "I am a traveler, far from home, and I have heard that your village is known for its hospitality." The villagers were hesitant. It was unusual for a traveler to arrive on the night of Samhain, and they were wary of strangers. But their chieftain, a wise and kind man named Ewan, stepped forward. "You may stay," Ewan said, "but you must join us in our rituals. Samhain is not a night to be taken lightly, and all who are here must respect the old ways." The stranger nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I understand," he said. "I will join you in your customs." And so, the stranger was welcomed into the village. He stayed close to the chieftain, watching as the villagers prepared for the night's events. He asked many questions about their traditions, their beliefs, and the spirits they sought to appease. As dusk fell and the villagers gathered around the bonfire, the stranger's eyes glinted with a strange light. The fire roared to life, its flames licking at the night sky, and the villagers began their chants and dances, calling on the spirits to protect them through the long winter ahead. But as the night wore on, the stranger's presence became more unsettling. He moved through the crowd like a shadow, speaking to one villager after another, his voice low and hypnotic. Wherever he went, unease followed, and the villagers began to whisper among themselves. As midnight approached, the moment when the veil between worlds was at its thinnest, the stranger approached the chieftain once more. "Ewan," the stranger said, "there is something I must show you." Curious, but wary, Ewan followed the stranger to the edge of the village, where the darkness of the forest pressed in close. The bonfire's glow was distant, and the night was cold and silent. The stranger stopped and turned to face the chieftain. He pulled back his hood, revealing a face that was unnaturally pale, with eyes that gleamed like burning coals. "I am not what I seem," the stranger said, his voice now a whisper that seemed to echo in the stillness of the night. "I am one of the restless dead, a spirit who has wandered this earth for centuries. I have seen many Samhains, and I have watched as the living have tried to keep us at bay with their fires and their offerings. But this year, things will be different. Yuan's blood ran cold as he realized the truth. The stranger was no mere traveler, he was a spirit, one of the very beings the villagers had sought to protect themselves against. And now, he stood before him, with a power and presence that sent shivers down the chieftain's spine. "What do you want?" Yuan asked, his voice trembling. The spirit smiled, a cold, cruel smile. "I want what we all want, freedom. I want the dead to walk among the living, not just on Samhain, but every night. I want the veil to be torn asunder, so that the world of the dead can reclaim what was taken from us." Yuan took a step back, fear gripping his heart. He knew that if the spirit succeeded, it would mean the end of his people, the end of everything they held dear. "You will not succeed," Yuan said, trying to sound brave. "The spirits are bound by the old ways. They cannot cross over unless we allow them." The spirit's smile faded, replaced by a look of anger. "You underestimate us, mortal," he said. "We are bound by nothing. The old ways are dying, and with them, the power of the living over the dead. Tonight, I will break the chains that hold us, and your village will be the first to fall." With that, the spirit raised his hand, and a blast of icy wind swept through the trees, carrying with it the whispers of the dead. Yuan felt the ground tremble beneath his feet, and the air grew thick with the presence of spirits. But Yuan was not without hope. He knew that the old ways still held power, and he had one last chance to save his people. Yuan raced back to the village, the spirit's laughter echoing in his ears. The villagers had gathered around the bonfire, sensing that something was wrong. When they saw the fear in their chieftain's eyes, they knew that the night was far from over. "The spirit is trying to break the veil," Yuan shouted as he reached the bonfire. "We must strengthen the barrier between our world and theirs. We must invoke the ancient magic of Samhain." The villagers were terrified, but they trusted their chieftain. Together, they began to chant the old incantations, their voices rising above the howling wind. The flames of the bonfire leapt higher, casting a protective circle of light around the village. But the spirit was powerful, and the ground continued to tremble as more and more spirits began to rise from the earth. They emerged from the shadows, their ghostly forms flickering in the firelight, their eyes filled with hunger and malice. The villagers held their ground, their chants growing louder as they called on the spirits of their ancestors to help them. And as the battle raged on, the air was filled with the clash of the living and the dead, a struggle for the very soul of the village. Yuan stood at the center of it all, his voice ringing out above the chaos. He could feel the power of the old magic coursing through him, bolstering his strength as he faced the spirit that had threatened his people. "You will not take us," Yuan declared, his voice filled with determination. "We are the children of this land, and we will protect it from those who seek to do us harm. The veil will hold, and you will return to the world of the dead where you belong." With a final, powerful incantation, Yuan thrust his hands into the flames of the bonfire. The fire exploded with a blinding light, sending a shockwave of energy through the village. The spirits shrieked in agony as they were driven back, their forms dissipating into the night air. The spirit who had led them let out a roar of rage, but it was too late. The veil had been restored, and the power of the living had triumphed. The spirit's form flickered and faded, his face contorted in a final snarl of defiance before he was pulled back into the darkness. As the first light of dawn broke over Tir Na Nog, the villagers emerged from their homes, weary but triumphant. The battle was over, and the spirits had been banished back to the world of the dead. The veil between worlds was safe once more. Yuan stood by the remains of the bonfire, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what had transpired. He knew that the spirit's words had been true, the old ways were changing, and the power of the living over the dead was weakening. But he also knew that as long as his people remembered the old magic, they would be protected. From that day forward, the village of Tir Na Nog celebrated Samhain with even greater reverence. They honored the spirits of the dead, but they also remembered the battle that had saved them. And as the years passed, the traditions of Samhain spread to other lands, evolving and changing, but always carrying with them the memory of that fateful night. And so, the festival of Samhain became Halloween, a night when the spirits of the past still walk among us, when the veil between worlds is at its thinnest, and when the echoes of ancient rituals still whisper in the wind. It is a night of both fear and celebration, a reminder of the power of the dead, and the strength of the living.